Hello, everybody. We are back with Black Panther Book Club today to talk about Ta-Nehisi Coates' run from 2016. I'm joined here by my wonderful co-host from halfway around the world, Fangirl. Why don't you say hello to everyone watching tonight?
Hello, everyone.
So just to give you a little bit of primer of what we are doing here, in case this is your first watch, or even if you've been watching all along, we have been reading the key Black Panther modern runs that we speculated at the time would contribute the most to the movie. We've both seen the movie now, but we're not going to talk about movie topics and movie spoilers in this broadcast, just in case you haven't seen the movie yet. So for the past three episodes, we've been discussing Christopher Priest's 1998 Black Panther run. We read issues 1 through 35, and tonight we're discussing Ta-Nehisi Coates' 2016 all new, all different Marvel run. And we're discussing issues 1 through 12, which make up the first oversized hardcover or 3 trade paperbacks of that series. So I think I want to pass the ball to you to start out tonight, Faria. Where should we begin on this series?
So first of all, is there anyone left who hasn't seen the Black Panther movie? Because according to the box office,
some people have, like night jobs and children and all sorts of things that could keep them away from a movie theater.
But at this point, looking at the box office, like it made like $1 billion already. I'm like, everyone who needed to see it have seen it.
It's interesting because one of the discussions I see on Twitter of people I follow who are all huge comic fans and Black Panther fans is this idea of like what is the etiquette for how long before you can openly discuss something like that, and they're like, is 10 days enough? Is 14 days? Personally, I feel like if I haven't seen a movie in the first 14 days, then I'm probably going to get spoiled, which is kind of a sad statement on spoiler culture, but I just feel like that's the way that it is.
Yeah, and that's okay. You never know what people are up to and things like that. But anyway, I'm not passing any judgment. But shame on you for not watching that.
I haven't been a second time yet. Which I really do want to do. So we both heavily endorse it. If you want to hear our thoughts on it, we have a 90-minute video from last week where we just talk about the movie. So feel free to go watch that if you really want to know.
Yeah, but back on topic at hand, Ta-Nehisi Coates' Black Panther run, and it's called A Nation Under Our Feet. And if you have read it, then you would know what it actually implies. It's all about, we are smack dab in the middle of a revolution or a civil war, you can call it, in Wakanda, where people are very upset about Black Panther or T'Challa's because what I'm understanding, and I haven't read the other Marvel events that leads up to it, that something happened and now T'Challa wasn't there to protect Wakanda. There was a lot of life losses and property damages, and now people are very upset about it.
So to characterize that a little bit, so the thing that it's referring to are the events that begin in Avengers versus X-Men at the end of the Heroic Age in 2012. And in Avengers versus X-Men, Black Panther is on the Avengers side, and Namor has become one of the Phoenix Five. And as part of the many showdowns around the globe, Namor causes a cataclysmic flood in Wakanda, which is really the first time it's ever been really wounded as a country. And so all throughout Marvel now, there's this head-to-head between Namor and Black Panther, even though they have to work together in New Avengers. And then ultimately, as part of Infinity, when the Black Order comes to Earth, which we're going to see a little of in upcoming Avengers Infinity War movie, one of them, Black Dwarf, I believe, or I don't know, one of them, is in Wakanda. And again, Wakanda finds itself conquered. So like within a few years span, Wakanda goes from the one unconquered, uncolonized, country on Earth. It's never been colonized, but they've now kind of had the scope of loss of life at that level for the first time ever. And throughout this whole period, Black Panther doesn't have a solo book. His last solo book had ended a little bit before Avengers versus X-Men. So we're talking about 4 years of stuff just kind of happening to Wakanda as a byproduct of other plots. And this is the first time we really get to see Wakanda respond or react to that.
Okay, all right. So yeah, because that's something that I kind of had to learn with the Wikipedia, with the help of a little bit of Wikipedia, because I was not. I read Avengers versus X-Men, way back when, and I remember that it was Avengers versus X-Men, or I remember the last panel where Scott, oh my god, I'm forgetting his name, but
Summers,
Cyclops.
Yeah.
Scott Summers and Captain America had like a discussion, and it was a very like profound and stuff. But otherwise, I don't remember much of it, so that's why I was like, wait, what happened? And but anyway, so yeah, we we kind of land on that situation in the first from the panel one, and also Shuri is dead. Like she sacrificed herself in order to save Wakanda, so you have to fill me in on that event as well. But it's kind of intertwined between the two. That there's a one which is a revolution going on, and we get to see the main leader of the rebel side. Then we also get to see, actually there's three sides. Then we get to see T'Challa, how he's kind of dealing with it, and then we also see Shuri, who is in a dimensional plane of Dijali. I'm forgetting the name of it, but a trans-dimension, like a dimensional space where she is actually experiencing all the Wakandan memory, and there is a being over there who takes the face of her mother, Ramonda, and as she's walking through that and kind of experiences all the stories. So yeah, that's where it kind of like that's the whole synopsis of the
there's so much inside of that to talk about.
Right. That's like a very bad Cliff Note version, what I just said. A bad one, not a good one.
So I guess I'm trying to even think where to begin. So let's begin with Black Panther himself. So we spent hours now talking about T'Challa and talking about how he's much more a king than a hero. And that's where we left him in Christopher Priest's run, at the point where he can afford to be very separate from what's going on because he's only very glancingly a member of the Avengers. Do you still feel like in this run he's more a king than a hero? It feels to me like that might have changed a little bit in the balance.
And yes, that's a fair thing to say. But honestly, what I kind of really missed is Everett K. Ross, from the Priest run, who was there to kind of be the point of view character. And you pretty much saw T'Challa from him. I mean, that's the only thing. And you get to see what a grand, how great he is and how cool he is. So I began to kind of see him as that, oh, he's the coolest, person ever, or he's like, all this great, like his intelligence is infallible. So to me, come here and they're not having Everett K. Ross and you're kind of listening to his point of view, like he's the narrator, was very different for me, because for the first time I could see that, oh, he is actually, like, he has a lot of flaws, it's not something that was not explored in the Priest run, but he's also very conflicted, because there is a time, I kind of forgot which issue number it is, but he says that I am not a king, I'm a scientist, or I want to be a hero. Like, he really doesn't want to be a king, and like he's pretty much just doing it. And the nation under our feet kind of comes from a discussion he has with one of the philosophers, exiled philosophers, about like, you need to, if you want to be a king, you need to kind of put your, keep the nation under your feet, pretty much, So yeah, and it was very different, and I feel like I liked it as well, because this is my second read of a different creator of Black Panther. So to me, I'm just kind of understanding all the different creators out there and their perspective. So based on that, but if you ask me to pick two depiction of Black Panther, I would hands down pick the Priest one.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about that specific comment, right, about not having Everett K. Ross, is we've talked about how Priest installed him as a point of view character, but that kind of keeps us at arm's length from T'Challa, and in a way, we don't get to pass as much judgment on the decisions he makes, because we tend to see outcomes. We don't really have the chance to really see the machinations and see what he gets wrong. Like, he gets some things wrong in that run, but we much more get to see him putting things right. Whereas I think in this run,
we're more forgiving of him. Because
I absolutely think we are, yeah.
Yeah, because Everett, Everett K. Ross kind of talks about him like holier than thou, and then you just puts him in a pedestal, and you forget about that.
I completely agree, and I think this run, part of what's I find a lot of this run uncomfortable. I'm not saying bad, but like uncomfortable in that like I found myself sometimes not rooting for the ostensible hero of the book, T'Challa.
Right.
And I think that part of what causes that discomfort is we're much closer to him in this run than we were in the Priest run, and so part of what we see, one of the big events that we're not at the very beginning here, but there's these various uprisings, and we'll come back to some of them, but he considers it terrorism, and it is terrorism.
Right.
But he's not considering the perspective of the terrorists and why people are allowing themselves to be recruited as terrorists. He's very much just about squash terrorism, which makes him seem much farther away from the people as a sovereign than I think he's ever seen before, even though we've seen him physically removed from the people before. And so he convenes this group of anti-terrorist men, and they're all from these awful fictional Marvel countries that are like super racist or speciesist or like autocratic. Like it's, somebody from Latveria and somebody from Genosha and somebody from all of these terrible countries. And it's like, and when word of that gets out, the people extra turn against T'Challa. Like if they weren't against him already, they became way more against him. And part of me is like, that's how removed he is as a king. Like in the Priest run, he would have decided on his own a way to get in there and do something and capture one person or do one thing. But here he's like so rattled, partially because of Shuri being half dead, half alive, that like he doesn't even trust his own judgment. He doesn't trust that he's got a nation both under his feet and on his shoulders. And so he turns to all these other people who are villains to try to advise him. And that's like a sign not only to the people that are citizens in Wakanda of how far he's fallen, but to us as readers. I think Coates is really trying to make a comment to us about how like globalized that T'Challa has become over all of these years, that he's not thinking like a Wakandan anymore. And that's why we have as one of the foils to him, Changameyer, who's the philosopher who is so very tapped into what it means to be Wakandan.
Right. And the thing is, like, I think like I missed out. Maybe the reading was more rewarding for you because you have been reading all the Marvel now, or like, all the Marvel events. I have not. So to me, I feel like there was a big jump. And, there was a certain, like, of course, like I was thinking about it. Yeah, things happened. So there was like, so he's much more different from that. But I feel like within like, last Priest runs end at like what, 2002 or something, like between 2002 and 2014 or 16 when it came out, like, all this time, like I have nothing to hold
there's
on
the whole Hudland run, and then Aaron writes for a while, and then Mayberry writes for a while, and there's Doom War, like which I haven't read a lot of. So a lot of the stuff about Shuri, like I've never read any of the issues where Shuri is the Black Panther, other than almost dies. I've never, like, I'm missing a lot of that development. I've read some of the Storm stuff because I've read it via my X-Men read. But that's about it. So we're both missing context. And I think that's an important thing to say, that the Priest run, even though we came into it cold, Priest assumes no context. He's assumed you've never heard of Black Panther in your life. Whereas I found the Coates run assumes a lot. Like, I don't even think Coates super describes who the Dora Milaje are. Like, I feel like he kind of expects you to just keep up and know, which I found like a little, again, this run is a very challenging read. And it's funny that so many people like came to comic books reading this run as their first comics they knew who Coates was, because I would not say this is entry-level comic books. This is 300 level comic books.
Yeah, I felt so bad for a lot of people who were telling that they're getting this run because they liked the movie. And I'm like, oh no, don't do that.
Get the Priest run!
Yeah, because the thing is, like, actually, like, I understand because it's like smaller run, so I guess like people would be interested in. But the thing is, like, if you're coming into this, if I read this first, I would have very different things to say about Black Panther. Like, I honestly would not have cared for him as much as I have, because I have all the context from, Priest run, what I know that's his normal and this is his abnormal. Yeah. So I know that's why I'm kind of like, I am much more forgiving, and I'm kind of looking at it more of a like, less like, kind of exercise in terms of looking at it from a different perspective. Then like, think if people go into it and think this is normal, then, they're not going to become a fan.
Yeah, I think it's upper level reading. Watch watch out, by the way. I think your microphone, you have your little zipper top on or something. I think the microphone might be bumping against it a little bit.
Yeah, zipper. Okay.
So I want to now step back. I was just talking about issue 4 or 5, but I want to step back to what we see in the very beginning, because this to me is why I was really into it to start, and then I kind of like faded a little bit. Okay. We start with these two Dora Milaje, Anika and Ayo, I believe. Ayo are their names. Yeah. And
Ayo from the movie. It's right. They call it Ayo.
Okay. So, and what we open with them on is that one of them has killed a man who is mistreating, possibly sexually assaulting women that are rendered to his care. And because he's a man of some standing, and because the Dora Milaje acted against orders in doing this, she is potentially going to be put to death. And instead, these two Dora Milaje, who are lovers, escape with these very fearsome midnight angel kind of exoskeletons. And they become a liberating force that are saying, well, Wakanda, whether it's been unconquered or not, we're generally talking about the population as a whole, but aren't the women and the children still conquered within that unconquered group? And so they become the force of saying women will no longer be subjugated. And it's interesting because everybody gets to be the villain in this run. At points, T'Challa is absolutely the villain. At points, the terrorists are mostly the villain, although occasionally they're not. But I had a really hard time ever looking at these two Dora Milaje as villains, because I was so sympathetic to their actions and their choices that I would find myself angry at T'Challa when T'Challa was like trying to scuttle their rebellion or would send forces against them. Like, how dare you? Because even if tradition is what it says it is, they're making the human choice, in my opinion. I don't know. How did you feel about that plot and Ayo and Anika as characters?
Right. So if you read The World of Wakanda,
I'm going to read that next. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of follows them, and it kind of follows them all the way from before Avenger versus X-Men to all the way to the first run. Like,
I have to read it.
The last issue, like last panel of them is running away, like, with them running, escaping, like, Ayo saving Aneka and then running away. So you kind of get a lot more context, and if you have read that, then you would be even more sympathetic to them. Like, you would see that what they have gone through and the things like. So I think, and honestly, like, I share the same, I share your, I agree with you 100% on this, that it was hard to see them as villains. Like, I couldn't most of the time, and especially I was even more outraged. And I'm assuming that everyone read it when issue 12, Shuri pretty much tells that Aneka that you should have let them die. That wasn't your job. Your responsibility. You are Dora Milaje. Your responsibility is to with the royal family, and you abandoned your post to go. When clearly you would see that there was no one. There was no leader in Wakanda at that point, because Shuri was dead. T'Challa was off to doing who knows what, and they took up the leadership. And as leader, they made some choices that may not have been, may not have gone well, for them, they had to pay they were made to pay, suffer up consequences for that, which to me, I was like, no.
Well, that's a fantastic point. And I think, to me, as the series matures and gets to its final arc, this is where I realized how powerful Coates' work was. In the middle, I was like, so checked out. I was having a lot of problems being like, how do I stay into this? And at the end, Coates was a first-time comics writer, and we should acknowledge this. He's an award-winning, MacArthur Genius Award-winning writer of nonfiction, but he's not
and from Baltimore too.
Yeah, and so I think he writes beautiful prose, but at the beginning he was he was writing narration to a movie that we were watching. Like, I didn't really feel like the prose matched up with what was happening on the panel. I think in the last arc he learned very quickly, and at the last arc we're there, and in issue 9 we get T'Challa and Changamire, the philosopher, kind of having a conversation, and with each other instead of kind of just being narrated over.
Right.
And they share a lot of kind of little bite-sized nuggets of philosophy that I really think address this fundamental disconnect between what the Dora Milaje decide to do and what Shuri as the queen thinks they ought to do. And
right.
And one of the quotes that really stuck with me was, "A philosopher brandishes an impractical morality, while a king preaches an immoral practicality." And that is perfectly characterized by the Shuri versus Anika conversation, because Anika, who's not even a philosopher, I mean, she's just trying to be a good person, is like, she's like, we've got to defend who needs defending. And Shuri, as the queen, says, well, unfortunately, you can't always do that because that upsets the law of the land, and then everything kind of becomes an exception. And so I think it was interesting that we had the philosophy argument, like the book argument, was coming from these two male characters. But then ultimately it's the two women who are kind of experiencing it practically, almost like the men are like removed from the actual practical application of this philosophy that they're so engaged in debating. And it's like the women who are doing the work. And that to me was like, that's a very deft turn from Coates. And it's incredibly intentional.
Right. Now imagine we deal with that every day.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just kidding. I didn't want it to be that political like that.
No, but I really think it's so interesting because it kind of like takes the hot air a little bit out of both T'Challa and Changamire, who both have very significant things to say and they're in positions of leadership. But even if you go to the third rail, which is the actual terrorists, ultimately their leader is a woman, and the woman's name is Zenzi. So it's kind of like Coates is playing. You know, I would definitely characterize this as a feminist comic book run, and I have a lot of filters that I apply that I say, is this feminist? And to me, feminist means equality. And I think that Coates is writing something very feminist because he's playing with the idea of like who has responsibility and then who takes responsibility. And he's saying something very interesting about like how these men are so enamored with having responsibility that they don't frequently take it. And I just, this is when I like really connected to the run. At that point, I was like, wow, I totally get it.
Now I love this series. I actually, no, I'm serious. Like that's a very good point. I actually didn't even think about that. But you're right, because whatever Changamire and T'Challa is discussing, Shuri and Aneka is actually doing it. You know, I didn't even think about that. Wow. I'm sorry, I'm baffled right now. I actually don't have anything to say.
That's why we need book club, because I was saying last night, Freya usually finishes these way before me, because I'm also trying to review 30 comic books a week. So I had like 3 a.m. last night. I was like, I'm done. And I didn't like it. And now within 12 hours, like all of this stuff has been boiling in my head. And now I'm like, no, I have some important things to say.
Gosh, but the thing is, one of the things, like, you were talking about their discussion, like when they meet up with each other. There was like one thing that kind of, and once again, it's kind of hard not to talk about it without being slightly political. So please, apologies for anyone who tuned in wanting to be a non-political thing, but I promise you,
this is a political channel. We don't have to apologize for anything. Wait until you see some of the reviews I'm doing next week.
So one of the things that we see that he picks up a book. I'm trying to find the name of the book. He picks up a book which is about American slavery, American freedom. Is it? And then T'Challa actually picks up the book from Changamire's Mayor's library, and one of the discussion that they have is that well, he says that what happened to the slaves? They're talking about American history of slavery and all of that. It's like the slaves. It was the slaves who started the war, and their country merely joined in. And he's like, but the slaves are free now, are they not? And Changamire says, too soon to tell, my king. Now, here's the thing, because the thing is, okay, it's very hard not to say this without, like, that was like so, someone who is so, like, what you call it, what's the word I'm looking for? My God, like, have so much privilege to say that kind of thing. Like, they're free now, right? If you know what I mean? Like, he is so cut off. Like, he's like, and I mean, it's kind of hard not to think about what we saw in the movie to kind of, like discuss this without that, but I'm not going to. But the thing is that like as I was reading this, I'm like, so much of it was in the movie, so much of it. But the thing is, like, it's just
I think it was, and I was like, this isn't in the movie at all. And then as the theme started to emerge, I was like, oh, this is hugely in the movie. It's like these themes were like inserted into the priest plots almost, is what it felt like.
Yeah,
oh, we're getting robot Korea.
Oh, okay. Can you go? How about now?
Now you're fine. Gosh, I wish I could. I'm sorry, it's always me pestering you about stuff.
No. That's fine. That's fine.
Me
But,
when I mess up.
Okay, but the thing is, like, no. I mean, to me, I was like, well, damn, mofo, you were like hiding behind, like, you know, hiding inside a country, and you were thinking that, oh, they're free now, right? Like, you know, it's such a like. Oh, like, I lived in the South, so apologies for any sound. Like, it's like a Southern white people way of saying things. Like, you know, it's like, oh, there's like, what's racism now? I mean, you know, there's
right, like, we're
not
post-racial now because we had a black president, so now it's post-racial.
There's no racism because there's no slave. And then like,
I love your like blasé white bread American accent voice that you're doing there. Is that your Chad voice that you do? That's awesome.
No, well, I have a Chad voice. I also have a Haley voice. You know, so Haley's from California, and she talks like this, you guys. Oh my God, Snapchat. But sorry about that.
Oh my goodness.
But yeah, so. Yeah, so the thing is, like, yeah, like T'Challa turned into T'Chad, and I was like, what's going on? But
I mean, it's interesting because so much of I haven't read Coates's books, but I've read him in The Atlantic because I was an Atlantic subscriber for a while, and this is very close to the thematic heart of the types of things that he writes about. But it's also, I think, I mean, you've got to address the privilege of T'Challa in talking about, you know, what is the Black experience in other countries around the world, because not only is he in this unconquered, uncolonized country, but he's the king. And it's like Shuri, if anything, through her path through the like world of the living and the dead, becomes more immersed in the monarchical perspective of Wakanda. So it's like, if anything, they've grown even more removed. And I think it's Changamire calls him out, I think rightfully on that. But what's interesting to me is I don't know if Priest's Panther would have said a similar thing. Like, I think this is why I think that this is just so interesting, and it's like 300 level comics, because it's more interesting if you've been reading Panther. It's so funny. I feel like Marvel usually brings people from the outside who are good to write something when it's supposed to be like fresh, and not be like continuity porn, because like they don't think people are going to come to this author that they know from out of comics and like have read all this other stuff. But Coates' run is like total continuity porn, because the more you know from everything from Priest, because he certainly references Priest, all the way up through the current day, it like enhances your read of it so much.
Yeah, and not only just Black Panther series, you also need to know everything else that's been going on in Marvel as well to understand all of this. You know, I was like, thanks to Wikipedia, I understood most of it. And I don't know. I think like it serves, like, you know, whoever those people who are reading it with everything else, it's a very much rewarding for them. But if you're just jumping into it, no.
So speaking of just jumping into it, so in the middle of this 12 issues, the middle arc, which has artwork by Chris Sprouse, professes to be kind of an action story. Basically, T'Challa voluntarily gets captured by agents of the Resistance, which include, is it Obadiah Stane or Ezekiel Stane? One of the Stanes from Iron Man, who's working with the rebels. And we get this brief action arc. You know, T'Challa is fighting people, and then the crew shows up, which at this point consists of Luke Cage, Storm, Manifold, and Misty Knight. So that's really exciting. But that was the point that I felt the farthest from enjoying this from. I felt like some editor like tapped Coates on the shoulder and was like, it's getting a little dry. You should have some punching. And also people are excited by Storm. And like Coates clearly knows about the Storm relationship and has been saying, even from before he was writing the comic book, that he was going to get there. But I almost feel like the book would have been better if we just went right from the first 4 issues to the last 4 issues and didn't have this like goofy fight in the middle, which I felt like the thematic stuff kind of fell apart. Like the Dora Milaje kind of disappeared, and I don't know. I felt like really really disconnected from the run, even though ostensibly I should have been being like, yay, a fight.
Yeah, and I kind of see where they were going with this, because I feel like that's where it came closest to being back to like a superhero comics that you can expect from Big Two.
Yes.
Because otherwise this run reads like a comic novel, like graphic novel from Vertigo or from Image, you know?
Yeah.
It really doesn't have a lot of superheroism going on. So I feel like they needed to have that. And so yeah, it does feel like a little bit of editorial interference as well. But I think even in terms of like the, you know, you get to see the bigger picture, that how powerful the revolution actually is. They're not just kind of your back of the, you know, back in the mountain cave like, you know, rebels. They're much more dangerous than that. And they pretty much used his own words against him. You know,
Yeah.
You see that all the words that he said to all the you know, advisors he got, that kind of went like, you know, they recorded that and used that against him to get riled people up. So yeah, I feel like it does go a little bit, but as I was reading it, I was actually kind of thinking as well, get to the point, you know, because yeah. I thought that a lot to myself, but then I was like, get to the point. I'm like, ooh, Storm. And
right, like even as you're like, I don't really like this, you're like, but Storm, and I think Coates, writes all of those characters really well. I know, Freya, you have read all of the Black Panther the Crew. I've only read the first 2 issues, which I was obsessed with. I thought it was so great. I've seen some critiques of some aspects of it, which I think are really interesting and valid, but personally I was blown away. And I think Coates actually really has a gift for writing Luke Cage, Misty, Storm. Like, I think if anything, this run needed more people to bump up against T'Challa. I think Coates writes the best T'Challa when T'Challa has to react to people, and we get a little bit too much of T'Challa like in rooms, staring at bookshelves, you know, like, and
right.
And another thing I really found affecting about this run was his great friendship and mentorship with Manifold. He never comes right out and says like, I'm mentoring this kid. But without ever explaining too much about how they know each other, you get the sense that Black Panther is really trying to turn him into a next great superhero. And he's very patient and kind with him in a way that we don't see him be with anybody else in the whole run. And I thought that that was a really interesting example of friendship. You know, 2 men who are incredibly close together, that you don't always get from comics. You don't always get from male protagonists, especially when they're next to each other in their suits that take them like into the psychic plane. They have this very tender moment. And I was like, wow, like Coates really like knew how to set that up and choose that, because that wasn't like he just dropped that in. He had been setting that up through Panther's trust of him throughout the whole series. Right.
And Manifold is also a mutant, right?
Yes, he is Gateway's son, uncle. Gateway was an X-Men, was part of the Australian Outback era of the X-Men. I'm trying to think of what his actual.
And he has the exact same power as Manifold, right? Like, you know, they were more or less the same. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and it was a very, very interesting though, because I was thinking that, you know, how he was on the Avengers side in the Avengers versus X-Men, like, you know, which is pretty much, you know, mutant versus non-mutant. There's a little bit of element of that too. And then after that, he is now also mentoring another mutant and kind of taking him under the wing. So, and
actually, Manifold maybe isn't a mutant. I'm not sure. He came up through Secret Warriors, but I'm not sure that he's a mutant. But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
I think in the Crew run, Black Panther in the Crew, they do say that he is a mutant.
He is a mutant.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, like, I thought it was very interesting, but once again, like, I was kind of missing the context of how they met and how they came to be. So I just kind of took it as a face value. Okay, like they probably met up somewhere, and now I don't know whether they met in the Ultimates, like, you know, because I know that Black Panther, he's the leader of the Ultimates in the Marvel now. So I was kind of thinking that that's where they probably met up.
He's not so much in Ultimates because they have America Chavez to like port them around. And Ultimates, I think Manifold might have been in the Hickman Avengers run, if I'm not mistaken.
I know he was
like a Hickman pet because he's from Secret Warriors.
Yeah, he was created by Hickman, but I wasn't sure that at what point their path crossed. So, but what I liked is like his conversation with Tony Stark over here. That was like, it brought so much joy. Anytime someone puts Tony in his place, I take a victory lap. So over here, he's saying, but Tony says that, oh, at least my brilliance exceeds my ego, and then he said, I'm happy you think so. And then and then Tony's like, I heard that. He's like, yeah, because I said it.
Yeah, right. Because Black Panther is like one of the
I,
few people that doesn't have to apologize when Stark says, "I heard that." I want to
yeah.
switch gears a little bit and talk about a part we haven't spoken about that much. So, but you've mentioned it. So Shuri is on this kind of plane of ancestors between life and death, and she's there with a spirit guide who takes the form of her mother, Ramonda, who's also in a coma at that point, but we're not meant to literally believe it's Ramonda. And for several issues in a row, Shuri and the spirit version of Ramonda trade allegorical tales of Wakanda's history. None of them can be taken completely at face value, but they're all historical and they all describe former rulers, former Black Panthers. What did you think of that plot device and those scenes?
Um, sorry, sorry. I had to actually respond to my sister. But anyway, can you please repeat that? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
I was asking about Shuri's scenes with Ramonda on the spirit, spirit Ramonda on the spirit plane, and how it winds up telling a sequence of allegorical stories about Wakanda's past.
Right.
What did you think about those scenes and that plot device?
I actually really enjoyed it because that one of the part that was missing from Priest Run, because I'm sorry I keep on talking about Black Panther Priest Run, but because that's kind of where my that we read it first. And so that was kind of missing from that, because we saw Wakanda pretty much through Ross's eyes, and also whatever was going on in T'Challa at the point. And so to me, to see a lot more lore to Wakanda was just amazing. It was you get to see a lot more of like all this different history, all this different. I wish I remembered most of them, but the thing is, like, it felt so like, I don't know, like so like royal, or so much epic. So I really enjoyed that portion of it, even though I wasn't quite sure what was the point of it, but I was like, yay, more of Wakanda.
Yeah, I think the first few times I don't know, like, I understood it was going to be important because obviously it's going to be important, but I was just like, oh my gosh, like, it was just like more talking over characters. Like, it just added to that feeling that I was having of like that this book was just being narrated to us and not like letting the characters speak and have agency. That I think by the last one, partially because the book was starting to really change its tone, but also because I think I was starting to appreciate them. The last one about the woman ruler who said, like, we're not going to be conquered, and goes out to meet the army. That's when I kind of understood Panther in many times, and I guess you haven't seen that as much in the Priest Run. Panther frequently gets to go kind of to the land of the dead and access the memories and and experiences of ancestors. But I feel like Shuri is tapping. Yes, but I feel like Shuri is tapping into something very different here. She's not just tapping into their experiences. She's tapping into, I don't know how to put words to it, like the knowledge, she's tapping into the heritage, the history, to what it means, like not just their knowledge of like, and that's why I stood up to the invaders, but like the experience of what it felt like to stand up to the invaders and what it meant to Wakanda to stand up to the invaders. And again, I think it goes to this demarcation between the men in this run and the women in this run, that Shuri is using her journey here very differently than we have seen T'Challa use his journey through similar unconscious states.
And that's also kind of mirrors what Aneka did, right? Like, in terms of like, okay, we're not going to just stand here, we're going to go out and fight. That's something like that was like a someone in Wakandan past have done it, and Aneka in current time is also doing it. So I think like that was like a little bit of, and it was mostly like her trying to find out how to be a good queen, I think.
Yeah, and what's so interesting to me in some is that ultimately, Shuri, having heard this story, is the one who's verbally sparring, as we've mentioned, with Anika in issue 12. But it's like, Shuri, like, you told this allegory. Like, you know that you endorse somebody making this decision. I'm not saying that's inconsistent writing. I absolutely understand why Shuri is now against it now that she's back in the physical plane. But I think it just, like, added another layer to, like, wow, it's hard out there to be a ruler because you don't have the luxury of making the decision that the first ruler or the first rebel made. You have this accumulated history and you can't do the things, have the freedom that Anika has.
And yeah, and the thing is, I feel like Shuri is more rigid in her belief. Like, she believes that if that's your role, you're gonna stick to it. There is no flexibility in her compared to how much, like, you know, we see T'Challa having more flexibility. So I think like that's where, like, you know, she's more like, especially with that word, because I was not expecting Shuri to say something like that. No. You know, not because of like, oh my God, you're a woman, you should be supporting a woman.
No, just because you expect Shuri, who's younger, to be more progressive. But in fact, T'Challa is way more progressive than Shuri.
Exactly.
Shuri in the comic books is extremely she's more progressive within the actual structure of Wakanda, but she's much less about modernity. She's much less about globalization.
Right. So, you know, so that, to me, I was kind of looking at it that she's trying to become that rigid, like, you know, like she's the advisor who brings T'Challa back. Like, you know, T'Challa tries to kind of become a little bit more flexible and move away, and then she's the one who brings him back. So, and that's because of her absence in the first, you know, whatever, in first 8 issue, T'Challa was a little bit off kilter, because if Shuri was there, I don't think he would have ever called those other advisors to come and advise him on how to squash Rebel.
That's true. Like, and it's partially because her version of that is tapping into history, which contrasts his decision. Yeah.
Yeah, so, his decision is like, let's get like this crazy people from like this racist countries and try to, and you know, some of the things that they were saying, I'm like, wow, are these people in like our current administration? Sorry.
Yeah, they're very ripped from actual life, some of the things that they're saying. So, I mean, moving adjacent to that point of being ripped from real life and the reaction of people on the ground, we don't see a lot of kind of on the street Wakandans. I mean, if we wanted to like make a political allusion to say like real Wakandans that T'Challa's interacting with, he does interact with the one person who's volunteered to get the repulsor bomb in his chest, and that becomes his real connection to somebody who's like really living in the country. The terrorist group ultimately has their own ideas about what they need to do, and they don't seem to really be all about listening. They want to amplify emotions. Whereas then you have the Midnight Angels who like are listening, but then can't help themselves but be a military force. And you have that one woman, Mother, who's working with him, who repeatedly kind of reins them back in and says like, are you listening? And I feel like Mother is meant to be really our window into like what it is to be a Wakandan in this period. Like, can you imagine being on the ground in this country at this point that these 3 different forces are fighting for the mortal soul of your country? Would you have migrated to the north to go live in the land that was controlled by the Dora Milaje? Because I feel like that's what I would have done, having perceived these 3 opposing forces.
Right, but the thing is, like, also you have to remember that the Midnight Angels necessarily didn't care for men. So they wouldn't have welcomed you. So that's where the line begins. Like, you know, that's where they kind of stop sympathizing them a little bit, because they were like, oh, we're going to liberate all the women, but, you know, the hell with the men. And, you know, they were just kind of, they were becoming, you know, the enemy that they were fighting in a way.
That's great. A great point.
Yeah, so that's how like, you know, they were kind of, but yeah, like it's one of those things, like I kind of miss that, and I think I understand why it's like, if you want to bring that element to it, then oh my God, you're just trying to, like, you know, it's like ultimately it's a Black Panther story. Like if it was Image Comics or a Vertigo, they could have dedicated at least 2 issues just talk about regular people, you know, the real Wakandans. But because it's Black Panther, because it's Marvel, it's not, that wasn't possible. So I think like that's one of the reasons it kind of fell in the wayside, and you were just focusing on the 3 different factions of this war.
Yeah, you know, I frequently have that feeling whenever Marvel does one of these books that's like a saga or like a big political thing. I get very frustrated that like it doesn't linger long enough to really make me feel the impact. I've read several times now Jason Aaron's run on Thor, which I think is one of the great comic runs of all time. Like, I don't even think it needs a qualifier, just great comic runs, period. And I'm not even a Jason Aaron fan, as we all know. And but something that I find interesting is he's having this big war of the realms that's happening below and behind the scenes of his run. And we kind of drop in occasionally to see how it's affected one of the runs or one of the realms, but we don't like, it's occasional. We drop in occasionally to see how it's affected the realms, and it's not consistent. And I think that, like, it's the same thing in Black Panther. Like, we hear about how hard it is to be a Wakandan, and we see, you know, these isolated instances, but the book doesn't have enough time to linger on some of these things in the way that maybe like an indie comic would, that isn't as dedicated to like fitting within the events that are happening and making every 4 issues a really sellable trade paperback. And it's, you know, it's one of current limitations of Marvel, that like even when they're doing this big affecting plot, like I never feel like it does enough about the status quo. I even felt like that in Vision, Tom King's Vision, which is brilliant and I loved. It's like a 5-star comic book. But I was like, wow, we didn't really get to spend any time with what the status quo of their life is. I don't know. Is that me? Am I just a weirdo? Do you feel like that when you read Marvel comic books?
Oh, no, 100%. I completely agree, because now I'm currently reading Mike Grell's Green Arrow run. And the thing is, like, it's all about Green Arrow, but there's something that happens to Dina Lance, and then she deals with it, but it kind of, you can tell that it's happening on the other side. It's not, so I wouldn't say that, oh my God, it's like, you know, bring my inner Chad out of me. It's like, oh, it's only happening, like, you know, they're not giving enough time to the women. But it's not. It's just because it's a Green Arrow. It's a Green Arrow title, so they have to focus on Green Arrow, even though hard things are happening on the side. So it's kind of, that's a trapping of having a title, like, you know, title character with like a title, and they have to do this comes out weekly, monthly. So, you know, it's kind of, we're reading it in a trade, so we're reading it in a straight line. But the thing is, imagine if you're reading it month to month, then there's 1 month he's gone for the whole issue. I don't know how well that kind of lies with a lot of people, so they probably try not to do that.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a really good point of, like, it's got that character in the title. Like, everybody, me included, gets annoyed when we read a book and it doesn't have that character in it at all. And you're like, well, I was expecting to read about Batman, but this is all about Robin. Like, that's a natural reaction we have as fans that I think in an indie book, even if the book is named after certain characters, kind of like more forgiven. Like, we know when we're reading Y the Last Man that, like, we can spend an episode away from Yorick if it means getting to know the other characters. But for some reason we have like this double standard, and even like the most loving fan, when we're reading a big 2 comic book, like, is like, oh, this one didn't have any Black Panther in it. And I think that's what they're struggling against. And I think that's why we have trouble getting the full scope of some of these things the way that you get in, say, Game of Thrones, you know, where like it has time to linger on every little character.
Right. And the thing is, like, you know, think about like, you know, let's say Spider-Man saved someone. I mean, how often do we say like, oh, that man's life or that woman's life that Spider-Man changed? Oh, snooze fest. So yeah, it's kind of, I kind of tend to forgive them on that. I wish there was, and that's one of the reasons that what I said, that if Marvel understood this, they could have just done trades of this like, you know, random Wakandans, and then, you know, created like story out of that, and then have that sell as a trade, or they put it up in the Marvel Unlimited. But obviously they don't do that. So, you know, we are kind of sitting here talking about this.
Yeah. So I have one more aspect of the run that I want to talk about in specific, which is that, you know, one of Coates' most famous nonfiction works is ultimately in the form of a lengthy letter to his son, who at the time is quite young. And there's a name for this genre. It's called epistem. I never say it right, but the genre of writing works of art through the practice of writing letters. No, it's not epistemology. I'll figure it out. Anyway, my point is that I think that, as we've seen throughout this conversation, Coates, I think, is the strongest in this run when he stops the philosophy and he has the characters talk to each other as through their familial bonds. And we not only have that with Panther to Shuri and Panther to Manifold, but Changamire and Ramonda clearly have had some kind of connection to each other in the past. Changamire, even to T'Challa, represents almost like a estranged uncle, because he had been at the court at one point and leaves. Even the two main terrorist characters, which is not fair of me to keep calling them terrorists, but it's just easy to label them that way. Which Rebel. Life. Rebel. Tetu and Zenzi have a sibling type of relationship. Anika and Ao are lovers. This is a book that is, as much as it's about ruling the country, it's really about the personal connections. None of these characters really has a non-personal connection to another. Even at the point that we get like the dopey villain versus hero part in the middle, we get Storm, who's T'Challa's former wife, Luke Cage, who he refers to as a brother, and two of the villains are Fenris, who are a brother and sister villain team. So I think like Coates has this theme of siblings and family spread throughout this run, and I think that really draws on the underlying experience from his lengthier writing.
That's interesting, because I once again, that's something that I didn't think about. But yeah, I don't, ultimately, like, what I thought about
Epistolary. Epistolary is the word I was looking for. Sorry.
Epistolary. Okay, I didn't know about that. That's something I learned today. But yeah, like I think like ultimately it's very strange, because I feel like I can't never recommend this to someone, because I feel like I have to recommend this with like 100 caveat. Like, it's like, oh, read this if you like. But I ended up enjoying it and really liking it a lot. And I think like it's like it falls under some of the trepidation of like, too much words and too much philosophy. But the thing is, if not Black Panther, I don't know who else you are going to talk about this. So, I really appreciated that.
Yeah, I think that especially reading big two comic books, sometimes we have a wall up against the comics that are going to really make us think hard. And it's like, even we know what a good comic is, and we know what a 5-star comic is, but we want a 5-star comic that's gonna like make us have that like endorphin rush that we get when we see characters we love doing cool things, which is great. And I love those comic books. But I think that even I, who's very self-conscious about this, can be really resistant to a comic that's not bad. I mean, at no point is this comic book bad.
No, it's not.
But I think you can be really resistant to a comic book that makes you think really hard and challenges your philosophical beliefs and like is uncomfortable. And I think that this comic book is really uncomfortable a lot of the times as a reader. Yeah,
because it's asking you to look at your hero, the title character, as a dictator. That's pretty much what it comes out to. Like, it's asking you to look at him as a dictator. And, so it's difficult.
Do you think that you would say that same thing about him if he was taking all the same actions that he took, but he wasn't the Black Panther? Like, if the roles were definitively separated and Shuri was always the Black Panther and T'Challa was always the king, would you still think of him as potentially a dictator, or is it connected to his heroism?
I would. Because I know it's a tough question. Yeah. Because the thing is, like, I am not the one for monarchy, or for like my personal opinion is not like I don't necessarily care, because monarchy is such a person based, so it's like it falls apart as soon as like a benevolent ruler goes away, right? Mm-hmm. So that point I was like I was not looking at him as that when I was reading Priest. To me, it was like, oh my God, it's a superhero who's a king, or he's a king, like, he's so cool and all of that. But for the first time, I think this made me face that truth and kind of made me like, oh, well, hang on. It's not all that rosy as it seems to be. So, yeah.
And it even makes you, in retrospect, look at the Priest run and think of some things differently. Like when he like dissolves all of the companies and the all the companies based in Wakanda, and he makes them nationalized companies, we reacted at the time like, that was so cool, he like took control of the stock market. But then you're like, wow, how many thousands of people were like, I just lost all of my benefits, or like now I've lost all the stock that I have in this company. But like in the Priest run, Priest never really makes us think of Black Panther in this way, and in the Coach run we like only get to look at him that way. And I think what makes him like seem like more of a dictator, and the reason I asked the question about separating the roles, I think there tends to be the sense that like heroes are always deciding on morality, and like at the point that you have control of a country and you feel like you have an absolute truth in terms of your belief and what morality is right, like, yeah, I think then you're a dictator. Even if you're Captain America, good Captain America, not Nazi Captain America, and you think that, I think you're still a dictator. And I think that, like, it's hard to reconcile somebody who's a hero and who has ultimate control of the people, because usually being a hero has to do with a certain moral absolutism that is terrifying when you make that person into a leader.
Right. And the thing is, like, also I was thinking more about, like, that it's like, oh, wow, he did all these things in the priest run about to save Wakanda and stuff, and then just disappeared, just up and disappeared, or left them to fend for themselves. Like, it left them in a leadership vacuum and then decided to come back. And now he's like all high and mighty about it. So there was a little bit of that too. But ultimately you kind of reconcile that. And it's actually Changamire when he talks to Aneka in the end and kind of makes you realize that, oh, okay, he has actually all this, all this burden on his shoulder, and he's doing his best. But sometimes that best for a leader is not necessarily what you want.
Yeah. And I think that the ending really drove home to me something I've experienced a little bit in my own life as a parent, as a leader of, and of people in occupational situations, is you always, as somebody who aspires to leadership or to wanting to help other people, you fantasize about that, or you train for that when you're one of the people. But then once you're a leader, you never really get to go back to being one of the people in the same way. And it's like, then you have to lead without ever knowing what it's like anymore. And especially for somebody who's a monarch, maybe they went to like a regular kid school or something and they knew what it was like to be a regular kid. But at the point you're a monarch, like, it's so hard to be grounded in your people. And it's the same way as like a manager. It's the same way as a parent, right? You say you're going to be this totally fair parent, but then you have a stubborn 4-year-old and you find yourself doing things that you swore that you would never do as a parent because the 4-year-old is stubborn and you need to get them to do the thing. And I just think that, you can tell that Coates is not this 20-year-old hit comic writer. Like, you can tell that he's got some life experience, that he's a parent, that he's studied what it means to have power, and that he writes about political concepts, because there's that sense in this comic book that I think that other comics that try to address these topics, like, don't all the way get there.
Right. And the thing is, like, but the thing is, there is hope though, because I mean, we're talking about, we just read only this 12 issues. So I don't know how it kind of progressed after this, but there's hope that in the end, he decides to create a council. And, so he calls all the tribes.
It seems like it's going to lead to democracy, honestly.
Exactly. So he decides to create a council, and, he decides to invite all the tribes and all the tribes leaders, and something that we saw in the movie too. And this is not a spoiler because, like,
no, I know. It's in the commercials. It's in the commercials.
Yeah, it's in the commercials. Like, it's in the movie too. But the thing is, no, I'm not talking about, like, it's like that we enter there at that Wakanda. So,
yes. So in a way, it almost, like, in a way leads up to the movie, kind of, because, like, I don't know, it has very interesting connections to the movie. I would not say, oh, you like the movie, read this run, but critically, conceptually, philosophically, it shares a lot of themes of the movie. So do you think, based on this reading, that you would want to read more of the Coates run?
Oh yes, 100%. I mean, yeah, and the thing is, like, I also read, like, the Black Panther and the Crew, and I would wholeheartedly recommend that, because that is all about superhero. That is all about, it has a superhero, it has politics, it has, like, and whodunit, it has mystery. So I would do that. Yes, but the thing is, like, I'm just like, I personally am taking a break from Black Panther, so I'll be doing a lot more Black Panther reading when the inevitable Black Panther 2 movie comes around.
Yeah, there's a lot of Black Panther. I mean, we read, well, you read way past me in the priest run. Even just reading our assignments, read 47 issues in 28 days. But you read something like 80 issues, because you also read the rest of the priest run, the World of Wakanda, the Crew. Like, you read a lot of Black Panther, almost 100 comic books.
Oh, exactly. And the thing is, like, I feel like, I got there, like, I'm like, okay, now I know this character and I love it enough. Like, I love him enough to kind of want to explore more. And I would definitely do that. But at this time, I'm taking a break. But but definitely, I would recommend.
So we came up with this idea at the end of a Sandman broadcast in January, where we were both saying we were reading some Black Panther to get ready for the movie. Neither of us had read a lot of them in the book previously. What was the thing that you were surprised about the most from all this Black Panther reading?
Wow, it's like, I don't know, like how to explain. Like I wish I was good with words to kind of explain it better. But the thing is, like, I was never like I would put him as a sideline. I honestly saw Black Panther as a character that just shows up in Avengers from time to time, and but he's so much more than that. That the fact that all the technology in the Marvel universe comes from Wakanda, or the fact that he's such a good leader or a king, or he's like all this, like it's like such a cool superhero. Like I didn't know that. So to me that was very surprising. Like I mean, it's surprising in the sense, like I pretty much had the exact same idea of when the priest, when Everett K. Ross talks about him. I am Everett K. Ross.
Where like the client is being wacky again.
Exactly. Like seriously, like the thing is, like the way he was reading, I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna read the first collection and see and then go see the movie. And then I'm like now 100 issues in and waiting to read more. And I saw the movie like twice. So that's kind of tells you where I started and where I ended. So I have a huge I'm truly fascinated by this character.
Yeah, I think the thing that was surprising for me was I didn't have a good sense of like what, not status quo, but like what normal was for Black Panther and a Black Panther.
Right.
Like I'm this big X-Men fan, right? And like for me, X-Men, like I have my concept of what baseline X-Men is. It's like hated and feared, it's soap opera, it's like, it's all these things. And then when my concept gets violated, or when the concept starts to change, I get annoyed, right? Like now it's like X-Men's about time travel. I'm like, no, it is not about time travel. Then I get angry. And I went into Black Panther knowing who he was, understanding who he is as a character, but like not really understanding what that baseline was, and wanting to know, like, what is it that a Black Panther book is about at its baseline before you get to the point that you're doing variations on a theme. What is the theme? And I think that I knew it was going to be about him being a king, but it's so much more nuanced than that. And I think I've said 100 times, surely by this point, that it's about how he's more a king than a hero. But I think that is like the theme. And you know what? Sometimes it's about him being a total king and not a hero at all. And sometimes it's about like when he gives up the Black Panther mantle briefly and is taking up Daredevil's role around the time of Shadowland. Sometimes it's just about being a hero. But those are the variations. And I think the theme of Black Panther is, at least in modern telling, is he's more a king than he's a hero. And that was just really interesting for me to learn and find out.
And I think that's why it was so refreshing, though, because I don't think there's any other superhero that has these two characters, that has these two different roles. Bruce Wayne, yes, he's a businessman.
Yeah, but they're all businessmen. Like,
exactly. Yeah. Like they're all businessmen, and then that is never explored, never talked about anywhere. I don't know. I haven't read Grant Morrison's run yet, so I don't know what kind of thing they discusses, but they're all like that, and you only see them as the hero that they are. But with Black Panther, he is a king, which is very responsible, like with something that comes with a lot of responsibility, and they show both sides of him. And that I think that's what I kind of responded to, and I'm like, wow, this is different, and this is new. And like I said, I didn't have any concept of him other than what I saw him in the pre-Civil War, or whenever he showed up in any of the Marvel books that I've read. It's like other Avengers books I read. So to me, it was like so new. And yeah, like I said, I am Everett K. Ross.
All right, well, I think that might be our last words on Black Panther for the month. If you've been tuning in live with us, thank you so much. Especially, I have to give a special shout out by name to Philip, who's one of our super fans and always finds the time to tune in at least for a few minutes. We totally appreciate it. And I love having you to chat with too. This has been so much fun, and we've gotten to read so many comic books that we wouldn't have probably read or talked about either way without this. We're not going to continue the live format in March. We're going to try doing some of these as pre-recorded shows and uploading them and seeing if y'all want to have more of a conversation in the comments there, and then we could always tweak and adjust in April. So I am happy to let you know that we are going to be starting March with Batwoman by Greg Rucka and J.H. Williams. So I will post the Batwoman schedule.
I have my copy as well. I just wanted to show off.
We have awesome cover art for the month of our videos that is from this beautiful, beautiful cover. And so we're going to actually take a slightly different approach than we did to Black Panther. We are going to break up the reading a little bit like we did in Black Panther, but with Batwoman, who has a very digestible amount of comic books about her, we're pretty much going to read every big Batwoman story ever. I have a Batwoman guide that talks about every every issue she's appeared in. And so we've broken it up into 4 chunks. And if you read all 4 of these chunks, you will basically have read every significant time Batwoman has ever appeared. So it's like an instant course on Batwoman. And that is going to start next week on this channel. So Faria, any final words you have to say to people who've been with us on the Black Panther journey through February?
Read Black Panther. Read more Black Panther. Go watch the movie. He's great.
Watch the movie for sure. Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, I can't wait to see his journey in MCU, and I cannot wait to read more of him. But yeah.
Yeah. I think my final word on the matter would kind of be like, if you happen to not be Black and you're reading and you don't know if you should read Black Panther, or you're not a woman and you're like, I don't know if we should read Batwoman or whatever. Like, I'm not saying that everybody just wants to read about people that look like them, but even I, who loves things about people who are not me, sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't know. Is that one for me? Like, you don't know unless you try. And I don't think that I had that necessarily about Black Panther, but I've had that about a lot of comics that seem like they're for kids, like they seem like they're LGBT themes, comics that have Black characters, and like you just miss so many good characters if you have that opinion. So like try to be able to consciously identify that if that's the thing that's keeping you from like, I don't know if I should read it, just read it. Like the worst thing that happens is it's not a comic book for you, and now you know about that. And I need to remember that too. I mean, I'm talking about all these identities and orientations, but I sometimes will look at a super macho comic book and be like, that comic book's not for me because I'm not this macho dude and I'm not going to get it. But sometimes those comic books are good too, and I need to like learn that just because something's about being a doodly dude and I'm not a doodly dude, like that could be a good comic book too. So I think Black Panther was a great reminder of that for me, and I'm so happy that we took the time. So thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Peter, aka Krisis, and Freya, aka Fangirl, bringing you your 4th and final installation of Black Panther Book Club. Thank you so much for watching here on Crushing Comics.
Thank you.